Hello and welcome to this Economist Events broadcast. My name's Anna Nicholls, Managing Editor for Industry Briefing at the Economist Intelligence Unit, and I'll be talking to Richard Bartlett, who's Senior Vice President for Future Mobility and Solutions at BP. Welcome, Richard. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great. So together we'll be discussing electric vehicles and the REV Index, which is a programme that was put together by the Economist Group with the support of BP that aims to answer the question, is the UK ready for the transition to EVs? With the transport sector accounting for 16% of total greenhouse gas emissions globally in 2020, the switch to EVs will be crucial if we're to cut emissions and mitigate climate change. With that in mind, the UK government has set a target to stop selling new fossil fuel cars from 2030 in order to switch to EVs. But then how fast EVs take off depends on a whole host of factors, from the cost of the cars, the extent of government incentives, to the range and depth of battery charging infrastructure and consumer attitudes. The BP REV Index aims to measure these things. It's scored from 23 indicators in all, across 8 different areas of readiness. It shows how all 40 of the UK's regions measure up on these factors in order to see where most progress has been made and where the remaining gaps are if we're to reach that 2030 target. It also benchmarks the UK against other major European EV markets, as well as China, to get an idea of global readiness for EVs. So I'm going to be talking to Richard about the key findings from the REV Index, but also more generally about the benefits and difficulties of the transition to EVs. So, Richard, first of all, can I just start by asking you about BP's own view on the transition to EVs and why you were interested in making up the REV Index in the first place?
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm a big advocate, actually, of the REV Index, and I'll explain why. So you probably recall back in February 2020, BP set out an ambition to be a net zero company by 2050 or sooner. And as we know, and similar to the data points you just shared, transport is roughly responsible for almost a quarter of direct CO2 emissions, and of which 3/4 of that comes from road transport. So a big part of BP's strategy to tackle those emissions is around accelerating the switch to electric vehicles. And we fundamentally see this as a critical part of a net zero world. For that reason, earlier last year, we set out an ambition to install and operate a large network of 70,000 charge points by 2030. But it's not just about that. It's about the whole EV experience. This is one big complex transition for many sectors, in particular for consumers and for businesses. And I think what you're creating here with the REV Index is giving us a framework and some insight into what are those conditions and boundaries and parameters that all play into transitioning at scale to electric vehicles.
Great, thank you. So, as I mentioned, the REV Index focuses on the UK regions, but to put that in context, it measures the UK against other countries. Were the results there in line with your expectations about which countries are most prepared for EVs?
But not surprised. I think what's happening now is we're starting to bring more data to understand how the different economies and different countries are moving at different paces. So I think if I look at the UK, I believe the Great Britain has made a solid start in getting prepared for the switch. We see lots of progress. There's lots more EVs on the road this year, and more charging points are appearing in many new locations week in, week out. I also think the ban on new sales of petrol and diesel cars in 2030 is a significant step. Understandable that we're not 100% ready in 2021. It's going to take many years to move the economy and customers to electric. I think, as you said, the UK ranks 7th out of 9 countries on the REV Index with a score of 40 out of 100. It's very close, and I'd say UK is roughly in the middle of the pack, but we've got more to do, of course. Norway tops the REV Index, as your report says, widely regarded as one of the EV leaders. That scores 67 out of 100. So everyone has more work to do here in the UK. And I think one of the biggest barriers to overcome is around customer attitude. And what I mean by that, it's, moving from an ICE vehicle where we've been entrenched for many years on that way of life to an EV is often perceived as a big step to take. But I think what you're starting to see as people move comfortably across to EV, the behaviours are starting to shift, and that's a big positive.
So how about in terms of the regions within the UK? I mean, London came top with a score of 48, and the East of England came bottom with a score of 33. How did that fit with your expectations?
Yeah, so I think the study reveals some interesting regional variations across the UK, and as many might predict, London comes out on top with a score of 47. There's strong customer and business sentiment. The incentives and policy are there, and the energy infrastructure is more supportive of the energy transition. And you just have to look at some of the businesses that are operating within central London now. You've got companies such as Amazon delivering with zero emission vehicles. You're starting to see ride-hailing companies like Uber start to adopt electric vehicles, and we're working with both of these companies to try and support that transition. Scotland comes second, and then Wales, and East of England came lowest, I believe. So I think a particular challenge on affordability in relation to average income. So study highlights the need to ensure equitable access to EVs, making sure we don't end up with a two-speed transition. And I think BP is looking to build out, and is building out in the UK, a nationwide network with ultra-fast charging across the UK, across all of these regions. And the pace of that will be driven by the scale of the electric car park. But we're committed, as I'm sure many others are, to a nationwide solution for Britain.
Yes, as you say, the UK is making considerable progress, particularly in London. But what, in your view, are the key barriers that prevent greater progress? I mean, why are people not buying EVs who aren't buying?
Yeah, no, it's a terrific question. And I think customer perception on affordability of EVs is a real important one. The second one is probably the availability, the reliability of charging infrastructure. So if I deal with both, on affordability, the survey by Ofgem this year showed that 59% of British consumers are hesitant to switch because of the price. And the REV index looks at the comparative cost of an electric vehicle versus a conventional car over a 3-year period, and finds that an EV is almost 50% more expensive to buy in the UK, and can cost 1.3 times more to run over 3 years. But the gap is already closing when we look at monthly costs to lease an EV, and tax incentives in the UK for business vehicles means that BEVs have become a no-brainer for anyone choosing a company car. I'll give you an example at our new Park Lane ride-hailing hub here in London. Well, I was there on Friday actually talking to a very high mileage Uber driver, and I said to him, is the EV more? Do you operate at a lower cost than you did before on an ICE vehicle? And he said his take-home pay is significantly higher as a result of transitioning to an electric vehicle. So I think you can start to see, with the right vehicle choice, the right incentives, the right charging infrastructure for high mileage users in particular, the transition is there and is already happening. So the same Ofgem survey showed 38% of UK consumers are apprehensive due to lack of charging points. And in reality, there are over 24,000 charge points in the UK, and it compares favourably with many other markets assessed. And the reality, in my view, is it's very different from the perception. And we operate as BP the UK's most used charging network, and expect it to power around 100 million electric vehicle miles in 21 alone. So there's capacity on the network. More charge points are coming down, and I just think it's important to bust the myths that the infrastructure is not there. And there's a really interesting report that came out I think last week from the AA in the UK, where less than 4% of electric vehicle breakdowns were because of out of charge. Right, and that's an important statistic. Yeah, so that means that the mass market does not run out of power when driving along, which is often the biggest concern.
if we take the first of those points that you were making first about consumer sentiment and the affordability question, what do you think the government or policymakers could do about that?
So I think you're seeing various drivers coming into play. Yeah, I think that the first one is vehicle costs are going to come down. Battery costs, which is a large percentage of the vehicle cost, as technology improves, will bring down the cost. There are various incentives the governments have put in place across Europe and in the UK around incentivizing the cost of the vehicle. So some of the salary sacrifice schemes that employees working for businesses are starting to see make the transition to an electric vehicle very competitive. And ultimately, I think the government needs to provide the appropriate incentives and to create and enable the transition, but it's also to create the space for companies like BP and others to operate fast and pull together the solutions that customers are looking for. And that is what we, and I'm sure others, are very much committed to.
And do you think more needs to be done just in terms of kind of persuasion and advocacy as well?
I think the scale of the change is so big, it can only help. Okay, so if we really want to become a net zero economy, more the better, I would say, as long as it's focused, as long as it's thinking through the outcomes that ultimately benefit the customer or the business. I think that's probably my steer on that.
And coming to the second of the point you were making about the charging infrastructure, what ways do you think the UK needs to develop that further so that EV drivers can recharge whenever they need to?
Yeah, so this is one I spend a lot of time on personally within BP. And so I think the first one is you need an expansive network, which means you need access to real estate. So working with town planners, government to create the ability to access land, to lay down infrastructure in locations that customers want is particularly important. The second one, once you've identified the land and the real estate, the power integration through the DNOs and with the power companies to supply the power is particularly important. So, if you look at some of our locations, a rapid 50 kilowatt charger, for example, is the equivalent of the electricity supply of 70 homes. Okay, so if you're laying down thousands of these chargers across the country, that's equivalent to hundreds of thousands of homes from a power supply perspective. So those considerations need to be accelerated. They need to cut the cost of those installations and integrations need to come down because at times it can be quite prohibitive. But all of those steps are beginning to be understood, and companies like BP are across the end-to-end customer experience around what the charging infrastructure needs to look like. Well, the last point I'd probably raise, which I think is particularly important, is the importance of reliability. When you're driving in your car, alone on business or with your family, when you arrive at a charger, it needs to work. And it needs to be a seamless experience. And we know through the data that we collect on our own network, but also our competitors are in a very similar places, that doesn't always happen. And there's a whole raft of reasons why that is the case. And I think one of the messages I like to communicate is that we've got a very rigorous program in place that will ultimately allow customers to charge at a charger on the BP Pulse network such that it is as reliable as fueling a car on a forecourt.
Is the electricity grid strong enough to survive everyone moving over to EVs to charge?
So the UK already invested heavily in its charging infrastructure. And I think from a power supply perspective, the total installed electric capacity based on charging speeds is an important barometer. And on this metric, UK drops to 7th out of 9 countries. So I think there's more to do, and ultimately it depends on how the network will evolve, where the network will be placed, and we're heavily involved in the conversations with the power companies and with the DNOs to make sure that the two synchronize, so the power is available and also the charging network is installed that synchronizes in a way. And I think in the short to medium term, we're confident that both can happen hand in hand.
So we focus mainly on the kind of demand side and the charging side. What about readiness on the supply side? Do you think manufacturers themselves are ready to make the transition to EVs?
No, it's a great question. So this year has been a particularly difficult year. The semiconductor supply chain complexity and issues have really impacted the number of vehicles available, but it's also impacted the number of chargers available. So every charger out there has technology and chips and semiconductors. All of that Internet of Things enablement is a key part of the offer. So I think on the supply side, what we're seeing this year, the demand for electric has rapidly increased, and you're seeing significant uplifts across all of the European countries, but also more broadly. And then you're seeing a tightness of supply generated by dislocation in the supply chain. I believe that will be a short-term issue. It will be resolved. Companies will deepen their supply chain resilience to make sure things like this doesn't happen. But I think if you step back, it's around the synchronization of the supply side and the demand side. This is still a nascent market, but you're starting to see some really capable professional companies come into the space. And with time, I'm confident that the supply side and the demand side will align to give customers the experience and service that they expect.
As we mentioned before, Norway came top of the index. I mean, it's clearly paced itself out as the EV leader. Do you think there's anything that the UK can learn from Norway in terms of best practice?
Yeah, so Norway is, as you say, it's top of the REV index. You're starting to see all of the parameters in your REV index play out in Norway, right? I think you're seeing the supply side and the demand side work together well. And there's also a real passion, I would say, in the country for net zero, for a net zero country and economy, right? So the transition is well underway. You're starting to see high levels of penetration. You're starting to see a really good quality of charging infrastructure be laid down. So overall, I think we visit markets like Norway to learn from both the consumers, the businesses, and government. And for the UK, we're on a similar path, and I'm sure we'll be accelerating to join them at the top of the REV index in coming years and months.
Thanks. So we're nearly out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, in your view, to sum up, what are the 3 key priorities that you think the UK needs to focus on to catch up with countries like Norway and to make the transition to electric vehicles by 2030? It's quite a tight timeline to phase out fossil fuel vehicles.
Yeah, so I think the first one is around the affordability of electric vehicles. Absolutely critical. So a customer needs to have the benefits, both regulatory, but also from the supply side, economies of scale coming through to make the electric vehicle more affordable. The second one is around the charging infrastructure, the speed of the network that eliminates range anxiety, the reliability of the network that gives customers the confidence to transition to EV. For me, they're probably the 2 most important factors in the transition. And then probably maybe the third one is around how do the companies operating in this space, how do we make sure that customer experience, whether it's for consumers or businesses, is truly outstanding? And for me, I define that as it's better than driving an ICE vehicle. And I think we have the opportunity to do that, because this is a very much a digital business. The customer experience is a lot more open. You can charge pretty much anywhere. And I think when all this comes together, the experience over time will be fantastic, actually.
Great. Thanks very much, Richard. I think that comes to the end of our conversation. So I'll just thank you for talking to me today and thank the listeners for their attention. If you'd like to listen to more similar events and to navigate the full findings of the REV Index, please go to theeconomistevents.com. But I hope you'll stay with us and listen to our next presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.